Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Giannetti of the International Housewares Association and Homepage News. And welcome to the second IHA tariff update as part of the IHA webinar series. IHA continues to monitor tariff developments impacting the home and housewares industry and implementing programs to help its members and retailers navigate this situation. The first IHA tariff webinar, held in late March, generated dozens of questions by attendees. And since then, many more questions have been directed to IHA. Today's update will answer several questions submitted in advance by IHA members. We also invite attendees today to submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of their Zoom screens. Time permitting, our panelists will answer some of those questions. Other questions will be saved for consideration to be addressed in follow-up communications by IHA, including blogs, webinars as needed, and more. We've brought back our panelists from the initial tariff update in March. Craig Breithaupt and Rafe Morrissey of IHA's Washington, D.C. Government Affairs Office, and Taylor Cloud and Will Mock from freight logistics service provider TQL Global. Before we get started, please note that IHA is setting up a tariff resource page on its website, www.housewares.org, that will aggregate all of its tariff-related initiatives and services. That should be done within the next couple of days, so stay tuned for that. Among those initiatives, just briefly, is a partnership with QuickCode, a software company that helps determine tariffs by HS number and country of origin. Also, IHA initiated a voter voice campaign that allows its members to enter their address and then easily send a message to their respective members of Congress. Today's session will be recorded and shared with attendees, and we will include links to all of the various pages that we've discussed. Before we get to the questions, however, I'd like to turn things over to Craig Breithaupt and Rafe Morrissey of the IHA Government Affairs Office. They'll provide some opening remarks and perspective on what has happened since the first IHA tariff update in March. This will include what we might be able to glean from yesterday's announcement by the president, some say prompted by a meeting with CEOs of Walmart, Target, and Home Depot, that tariffs on Chinese goods could come down, quote, substantially. Craig, Rafe, take it away.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's great to be on webinar 2.0, IHA's webinar, second webinar on tariffs. Since we last met on March 27th, reciprocal tariffs were announced by the president on April 2nd and then delayed for 90 days until July 9th while negotiations take place. Now, there is a baseline 10% tariff that, as I understand it, applies to all of the various countries subject to the reciprocal tariffs. That is ongoing. Now, that construct is true for all the various countries subject to the reciprocal tariffs, except for China. China, on April 9th, was subject to a hike in the reciprocal tariff to 125% by President Trump. If you add the 20% fentanyl tariff, if that's what you want to call it, that's how you end up with this 145% tariff figure that has been bandied about in the news. All right, not great news, but there is good news. In my opinion, it is good news that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been anointed by President Trump now as the leader of the tariff team. Bessent is much more circumspect on tariffs. He is not a hardliner, and he understands perhaps better than others in the White House the impact on the markets as far as executive branch actions in this area. The second is, and we're not going to get into too much detail, but it is a victory for IHA and others in the private sector. The U.S. Trade Representative's Office issued its final action on Section 301's China shipbuilding issue. The original proposal was very draconian and would have had very negative economic consequences. We informed USTR along with a number of other groups that kicked in money for a very, very sophisticated economic analysis that was submitted to USTR and the basis for testimony over there, as well as a joint letter with 300 other groups saying, don't go down this path. It will ruin the economy. Well, I think they heard us over there, and the final rule is much, much softer and more easily digestible to deal with. So that is something that IHA has been involved in. I just very quickly want to mention that IHA has been approaching the tariff issue from a lot of different directions. I think many of you on this webinar know that as IHA members. Peter mentioned the voter voice campaign. That is an electronic, it's a digital advocacy campaign where you can plug in your name and zip code and automatically your members of Congress pop up. There is a pre-populated letter. I think you can customize that a little bit. That is having an effect. Hundreds have already utilized it, and that is to support the Trade Review Act of 2025, bipartisan legislation in the House and the Senate that says, whoa, executive branch, the legislative branch ought to have a say in these tariffs too. So that's it on for my report in terms of the 30,000-foot level. And Rafe, I believe you're going to weigh in on this most recent, the most recent sounds coming out of the White House as far as maybe equivocating a little bit on the China tariffs.
Thanks, Craig, and good to see everybody. I think two things came to mind when I saw the news yesterday. The first is a quote that I found to be very relevant and proven out time and again, which is by Herb Stein from the 1980s, which is, if something can't go on forever, it will stop. And I think the announcements by the president are an indicator of that as it relates to these Chinese tariffs. Both countries are sort of in the mode of approaching each other, improving the concept of mutually assured destruction. And I think while both have a number of advantages, it's having a deep impact on both sides of the equation. And so hopefully there's a motivation to mitigate this that will play out hopefully quickly over the next several days. I also think a lot about a quote from Winston Churchill after the Battle of Britain, which is, this is not the end, nor is it even the beginning of the end, but it may be the end of the beginning. So I think there are a number of challenges to figure out to get to a resolution of this, but the process has clearly started. I think the pressure, as Peter noted, in terms of the CEOs from the major retailers, as well as obviously Wall Street, and a huge amount of input. And we are also seeing the legislation in Congress for having a cumulative impact to find some way to bring this to a close. What is uncertain to me, at least, is what is President Trump's bottom line as it relates to China or any of the tariffs. We noted that, the 10% level remains in effect, and while we hear discussions about favorable negotiations with as many as 24 countries that are in the process of being developed, I'm unsure whether that will result in deals that will eliminate all tariffs or whether there will be a baseline tariff applied. And then certainly with regard to China, what is the ultimate outcome that the administration will accept? I do think that the likelihood is that there will be some level of tariff in place. And the other wild card is, the reconciliation bill to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It continues to be developed, and there may be some level of tariff that's needed to provide a pay for extending the tax cuts and also incorporating new tax cuts on tips, Social Security, et cetera. So that is going to be a factor too. But I do feel like what we saw yesterday represents significant movement towards a better resolution than anything we've seen, certainly since the last webinar, and frankly, up until yesterday.
Thanks, Rafe, and thanks, Craig. Yes, this is a very fluid situation. We've acknowledged that from the beginning. And when we put together today's session, we curated questions that were submitted in advance. And we think the questions that we're answering today are still relevant as the situation exists today. But it is important to keep an eye on things, and we will continue to do that. And we'll get back to you if we feel there's another opportunity to update the industry on what's going on. So now we're going to get on to the questions that were submitted by IHA members in advance of today's session. The first batch of these questions will deal with some things that are sort of kind of like Tariff 101, I like to call it, but they are questions that many people still have. So we're going to start with one of the simplest questions to answer, perhaps, but it is a question that many people have asked. Are tariffs paid at the rate at the time a product ships from China or elsewhere, or at the time of arrival in the U.S.? And Taylor and Will, why don't you take a stab at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a basic question, but there's some odd nuances on it. On most shipments, that is going to be paid upon entry to the U.S. So,
okay. And what are some of the nuances that might affect that?
and I think we'll go into some of them when you're utilizing bonded warehouses,
Okay.
when things are moved inland, things like that. But your standard shipment duty is paid upon arrival.
Very good. Thanks so much. Another one. Is there a website that includes the tariff rates per HS code? Where can one find a complete real-time list of all countries and duties for which the reciprocal tariffs have been announced, pending the 90-day pause and any other variables that have sort of interrupted the schedule? And I will once again note that the partnership that IHA has with QuickCode does enable people who participate in that discounted program to be able to kind of get a real-time check of rates per code. But is there anything else out there that people can look to get some of this information in real time?
Yeah, I can take that one. It really depends on the tariff you're looking at. So there's going to be, I guess, a bunch of different websites you can go to. There will be some law firms that have released their tariff breakdowns. There are the HGS website that breaks down every single HGS code from the U.S. government. There's the Federal Register, which has a detailed report of the actual tariffs themselves, what they apply to, what the exemptions are, and all of that. But you would need to use all of those in unison in order to create the full picture. So it's always best to get with your...
Is there something that we can share with attendees just to do that?
Yeah, we can send that over.
Yeah, very good. All right. Anybody else want to have anything to say about those two questions right now? I know they're basic questions, but it's a good place for us to start.
I was going to add a little bit to mine because there was a quick question on the reciprocal tariff, and that's when it kind of goes into those nuances and why those sites and those tools are important. There are clauses on some of these new tariffs based on when a shipment departed to fall, are you charged the reciprocal tariff? Are you not, based on departure date? However, those calculations are ultimately going to be done, and then the duty is paid on arrival. So how they're calculated can vary on departure date, depending on the Federal Register and those other tools Will had mentioned.
Yeah, I do want to interrupt with another question that just came in today, but we're on the topic. And what cost is the tariff paid on? First cost, wholesale cost plus shipping. What's the duty? What's the final calculation that the duty is paid on?
So the final duty amount or tariff amount would be based off of the dutiable rate. So whatever is listed on the commercial invoice. So there are a couple different ways to calculate that dutiable rate. But in most cases, it's usually the price paid or payable between the buyer and the seller.
Got it. Now we're going to get into some of the nuances related to other tariffs and other baseline tariffs and how it all kind of works together. One of our questions came from a company in Mexico, but I'll ask the question in the context of the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that was put in place a few years ago by the Trump administration, the initial Trump administration. And the question is, to what extent are importers of goods from Mexico and Canada currently covered by USMCA and exempt from country-specific reciprocal tariffs if and when imposed? Are they exempt from the 10% baseline global tariffs? Are cookware products from Mexico, for example, exempt from stainless steel and aluminum tariffs? I know that's sort of a multifaceted question, but Will, Taylor, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, so with the USMCA being in place, it does remove the reciprocal tariff or any IEEPA tariff that's currently in place. But if they are, I guess, subject to the steel and aluminum tariffs from Section 232, then the USMCA does not remove. that
So-
tariff.
So if they're subject to that 25%, is that correct? The steel and aluminum?
Correct.
That's the old, that do they pay only that, or do they pay that on top of any baseline reciprocals? No?
They would pay just that in
Okay.
that case. And
Got it.
in some cases, it's based off of the aluminum or steel content. In other cases, it's based off the total value, if it's applicable.
Let's apply that same question on steel and aluminum tariffs canceling out reciprocals. Let's use the example of Chinese-made carbon steel cookware, which someone submitted. What tariff rate would apply using the current 145% total tariff on Chinese imports up to? Where does the stainless steel aluminum cancel out any of the fentanyl tariffs or any of the other tariffs that are now actually in place?
Yeah, so in this case, it would cancel out the reciprocal tariff of 125%, but you would still see the 25% Section 232 steel tariff and the IEEPA fentanyl tariff of 20%.
Interesting. And I appreciate the math gets confusing for a lot of our members right now. And it's constantly getting changed. And I know people will still have questions about this, and we'll try to get to them if we can. I'm going to direct this actually to Craig and/or Rafe. One of our questions is, are tariff exemptions possible if a product cannot be quote unquote made in the USA? And to that point, are there any processes in place to apply for exemptions from the latest round of proposed and implemented tariffs? Craig, Rafe, want to take a shot at that?
I'll just jump in very quickly, and I'm sure Rafe will want to take the baton on this. Rafe and I have spent a lot of time talking about this in terms of where is the point of entry to seek an exemption if there is a component or something that simply can't be sourced in the United States. And regrettably, at least in kicking it around with Rafe, we've come to the conclusion that for IEEPA, there really is no formal exemption process. And now, if we're wrong on that, and if William and Taylor have found something where it can be filed, fine. That's why we're having this webinar right now. But the IEEPA tariffs really don't have the same kind of exemption or exclusion process that the Section 301 tariffs have, the 232 tariffs over the Department of Commerce. The fentanyl tariffs don't have it either, as far as I know. So unfortunately, in terms of trying to leverage yourself, and I know Rafe and I feel that maybe one of the better ways is to go to your member of Congress and talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the short answer is there's not a formal process that you can, fill out a form and apply for, but there is a lot of wheeling and dealing going on. You saw the whole possibility explored of exempting Apple iPhones, and then that got pulled back in with new potential tariffs on electronics that may roll some of it back in. But I do think that there is a lot of discussion going on. As these negotiations with the various countries progress, I think there are opportunities to introduce some of those into the mix too. At the moment, I think there's so much focus on sustaining the hardline position of the tariffs that there hasn't been a lot of movement, but I am hopeful that will open up. And I think that there's also a divergence of opinion in terms of how, for example, Secretary Lutnick approaches these issues versus Secretary Bennett. But even Lutnick had said in an interview that I've looked at a lot that ultimately that you should have tariffs on things that are made here and not have tariffs on things that can't be made here. So there's sort of a predicate for potential exemptions down the line. And my hope is that as the temperature cools, there'll be an opportunity to pursue those, if not officially, then at least unofficially.
And I think this is another place to point out that through the Voter Voice platform, people in this industry have an opportunity to reach out directly to members of Congress to kind of share their thoughts on why tariffs are presenting a problem for their businesses. I will also tell you, IHA has been working to collect stories from industry members right now on how this is affecting their business. And we are going to embark on a campaign of advising business media, consumer media on some of these stories and trying to get the word out on that. And I think the point, and we talked about how the Walmart Target, Home Depot meeting was influential. And I don't know if anybody out there is good friends with Tim Cook, but there are ways to continue to advise your representatives and ultimately get that message to the White House on what's happening because of the tariffs. So while there are no exemption, processes in place, voice of the industry can still be very strong, and we're helping to deliver that. Before we wrap up that, Will, Taylor, was there anything on exemptions that you were aware of that we need to add to the conversation?
Nothing on IEPA that's been released. Everything stated is that there currently is no exclusion process.
Right. Okay, good. This goes back, next question gets back to the issue of products produced in the U.S. versus those that are assembled and packaged in the U.S. and what qualifies as made in the USA status. The question was asked in the context of, can a company produce parts using its mold in China or elsewhere and ship the parts to the U.S. at a much lower value and therefore mitigate some of the overall tariff, of the overall duty? Craig, Rafe, I think you have some things to add to talk about on this.
Well, that can be, that's always a head scratcher. Whether American cars are really made in America or not. You have different parts, transmissions that may be made in Canada or Mexico. But I think in this context, and I know all of us have kicked this around a little bit, William, I think, kind of gave us the summary answer in terms of, I think, the relevant HTS code. William?
Yeah, so ultimately it will depend on the HTS code and which tariff you're specifically talking about in this case. Because I know someone did mention in the chat here, for the reciprocal tariffs, if the U.S. portion of the goods makes up at least 20% of the value, then it would exempt at least that U.S.-made good portion from that reciprocal tariff, but the rest of the non-originating materials would still be subject to. But outside of that, it would definitely depend on the HTS code and if there's a substantial shift or tariff shift when everything is put back together.
Anything else before we wrap up that? And I'm aware that there are people asking, I know that Will said he's looking at the chat. There are people asking very specific questions related to some of the stuff that we've discussed already. We're going to try to get through the questions that we kind of pre-vetted and get to some of those as needed going on. So be patient with us if you can, folks. And to anybody on the panel, if you see a comment or question in chat that you feel is relevant to kind of bring up in the context of what we're talking about, please go ahead and do that. So we've talked a little bit about mitigation of tariffs. I think there were a number of questions that we got ahead of time asking how to mitigate the impact of tariffs. And one of those questions is the use of DDP Incoterms. And I'm going to ask Taylor, Will, to explain DDP for those who may be unfamiliar with it as a way to mitigate tariffs. Tell us how that works and what the potential is in this scenario.
Yes. So as far as Incoterms, just in general, a set of rules on responsibilities between buyer and seller, an international transaction. DDP specifically is delivered, duty paid. So that is putting the duties and taxes on the supplier as opposed to the importer, which you probably see more frequently now. It is an option, but this is also something that needs to be a conversation in a very, very thoroughly reviewed contract with that supplier. It does not negate the tariffs. Someone is still paying those tariffs, whether that be you or your supplier. So going through those negotiations, maybe it's a negotiation on splitting tariffs or where that cost is going to lie. But even switching that Incoterm does not immediately negate your responsibility on those. A lot of times you'll see it in different spots in the contract. You'll see the charges broken down differently. Itemized charges is going to be very important to know where your money is going.
Are you getting more people that you're dealing with asking you questions about this, being put in a position where they want to consider that right now?
Absolutely. Definitely on the table, but something to really get into the nitty-gritty details of that sale.
Okay, good. You mentioned, Taylor, bonded warehouses earlier. We're seeing a lot of people look into right now the potential of using bonded warehouses to either postpone the payment of the duties, to manage cash flow. You can't afford to bring it in at that rate right now. Uh, uh, Before we get to asking what are the pros and cons of using a bonded warehouse, I do want to note that IHA is working to compile a list of bonded warehouses, along with an educational component that explains how they can be best used. And that information will be on that tariff-related resource page that I referred to earlier. So stay tuned for that. But I imagine, Taylor, there's tremendous interest in using bonded warehouses right now. What are the pros? What are the cons?
Yes, so that's a big one. Will's going to jump on bonded warehouses.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. So biggest pros right now are obviously that you defer the duty payment until the goods are actually released from that bonded warehouse and entered for consumption into the U.S. So that is the biggest pro right now. So it is still taking a gamble that the tariffs will decrease by the time you're ready to, I guess, bring those goods in and make your final sale to your customers in the U.S. But it does come with cons. So it will be a heightened cost, right? Because bonded warehouses are going to be, I guess, pretty difficult to find and source at this stage because everyone is looking for the same thing, and obviously they will take advantage of that and raise costs, and you don't get your goods right then and there. So if you absolutely need something, then you will either need to pay or resell it to someone in a different country.
Dude, I know I mentioned the IHA is going to compile a list of the bonded warehouses. Taylor, do you have a sense right now of where we are from a capacity standpoint in bonded warehouses in the States?
Not a definitive answer right now, but I know we do have access to it. And yeah, we can definitely help you with compiling that list.
And in the long run, it is a potential cost saver, not just on the gamble that the tariffs will be lower, but all apples to apples right now, it's a way to mitigate your costs, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. I know that in our conversations preparing for this, the idea of free trade zones came up, and I'm curious, where are free trade zones applicable as a way to mitigate tariffs? Where does it work? How does it work? And is that an opportunity in the United States, or is it just an opportunity outside the borders of the U.S. right now?
So while the locations will be inside the U.S., it's not technically the United States. So it's exactly how it sounds. It is a foreign trade zone within the border of our beautiful country here. So with that, it's similar to the bonded warehouses. So whenever you enter the goods into the foreign trade zone, as long as it's not under foreign privilege status, then the duty, tariff, all of that will be dictated based on whenever it's actually entered into the U.S. for consumption. Now, with foreign trade zones, they are a little bit more particular on allowing goods in. So I guess the compliance behind it is a little bit more confusing. So just make sure that you have trusted partners that know what they're doing in that case to make sure everything goes smooth.
I'll ask the same question I asked earlier with regard to bonded warehouses. You're seeing a heightened activity in the foreign trade zones right now, correct?
Yes.
And is that going to be subject to capacity issues at some point or no?
Potentially. Now, I know a lot of larger importers, or I guess exporters in this case, are using them quite a bit for different things because with foreign trade zones, you're able to do a little bit more with the product. And there's also not a timestamp on how long you can store the product in the zone.
Okay, we are moving along, and I see all the questions coming in on the side. So we're going to do our best to get to some of those as well. This isn't a question about customs enforcement to address the potential undervaluation of containers and shipments. And I'm curious, as are others, what are the penalties if you are found to have used such a practice? Put that out to
I'll jump on that one.
Yeah.
This actually recently came up on a call with CBP. It is something that they're monitoring. these come in forms of what you'll hear as a CF-28 or a CF-29. These are requests for additional information, possibly penalties, where they're looking for manufacturer affidavits, lists of costs, things like that. These are coming up more frequently. It is something that there are eyes on, verifying the cost and the actual price paid for the goods. They kind of have different levels of culpability, right? You know, was this something that was intentional? Were you aware? Is this something you have a track record of? And penalties are kind of assessed on that basis. Was it some, you know, I don't know why, but I compare it to like a kid getting in trouble, right? You lie once, we have a conversation about it, you pay a little bit of money. You do it again, you're caught repeatedly, those consequences are going to be worse. The monetary consequences are going to be worse, up to suspending your ability to import into the U.S. Obviously, the most severe.
Does Customs have the resources available to increase its enforcement of such things right now? What's your thought on that? I'm curious.
I mean, nothing official has come out. I will say, kind of in the customs broker community as a whole, we are all seeing more of these requests from CBP.
Got it. Thanks on that. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to ask Craig or Rafe to provide us an update on the removal of the de minimis exception for low-value goods from China. When is it applicable? How are the duties valued? How will it be enforced?
Rafe, you want to take that one?
Sure. So watching the increases or the tariffs applied to the de minimis exception was sort of like watching your gas pump. It started out, I think, at 30% and then quickly escalated to a point now where I believe it's at either 120% of the value or a flat $100 fee that will rise to $200 on June 1st. The quirk is that it basically allows the shipper of the good to determine which of those two models will be applied. So there's some variability into it. I actually just saw an article that was posted that indicated that in response, Temu and Shein have increased their prices that will go into effect on April 25th. So in that narrow instance, it has some benefit, I think, in combating counterfeit goods, which I know had been a problem for a number of IHA members, prior to the tariff explosion. And depending on how you look at it, it's a silver lining, or at least an element of this that is tied to the actions that the administration has taken against China. I am uncertain, to be honest, what impact there will be on the de minimis exemption as it relates to any modus vivendi that is achieved between the United States and China on the broader tariff issues. And that may be indeed one of the challenges that we have in terms of wanting to find some way to address the counterfeit issues moving forward. But, given the scope and enormity of the challenges that folks importing legitimate products from China are facing, it's, I guess, minimal at this stage. So I'm certainly not looking for any increases to those levels, and I've not seen any indication that they will be reduced, but I suspect that it's likely. And actually just been monitoring things as we've been on, now seeing comments from President Trump that he estimates that tariffs will come down to the 50 to 65% level. So still not great news. And, that may be an opening bid, as they say. But maybe we'll see some equivalent adjustment as it relates to the at least going back to the original levels for the de minimis imports, which are for products valued at $800 or less.
I wish I had a breaking news, Scott, thing that I could have put up there. Ray, thanks for keeping us up to the minute on that announcement. I'm sure everyone's watching it really closely. Staying within the realm of policy and various related issues, Craig referenced the Trade Review Act of 2025. Maybe we want to kind of reiterate what that is again. But are there other things with regard to policy announcements that are coming that whether it's trade policy or tariffs, trade policy on a broader basis or tariffs more specifically, that we need to keep an eye on? What might be coming down the pike?
Sure. Let's start with the Trade Policy Act of 2025. I mean, what's happened here has focused attention on the broader issue of the relevant powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And what you have with the Trade Review Act of 2025 is you have Senator Chuck Grassley, who is the president pro tem of the United States Senate, a Republican, and Maria Cantwell, a Democrat, Grassley from Iowa, Cantwell from the state of Washington. Bipartisan bill. It's very simple. I think it's all of one page. It just says anytime the president imposes new tariffs, Congress has 60 days to vote yay or nay. So that brings Congress back into the action. In the House, the bill has been sponsored by Congressman Don Bacon from Omaha. I'm at a loss as to who the lead Democrat co-sponsor is. But this ties into the voter voice campaign. I believe that it is not a coincidence that the president has announced a willingness perhaps to lower these tariffs on China. You see these three major retailers going in. I suppose that Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, probably played a role in helping put together that meeting, but also happening in terms of different factors here are Republican members of the House and the Senate who are away for Easter break. All of Congress is on break right now. They come back April 28th. Right now in the Senate, there are 13 bipartisan co-sponsors, an almost even number of Democrats and Republicans saying, yep, we're going to sign on to this bill, and it's about time that we got back into the action on tariffs. In the House, there's only 5. And I know that Rafe and I and others will be watching very closely how many more co-sponsors get on the bill in the House, which would be a very visible display, particularly from Republican members, that they got an earful back in the districts and their patience is wearing thin. There are other things going on here. By the way, if any announcements come with regard to these negotiations, they are likely to be in the form of memorandums of understanding. It takes a long time to negotiate complicated trade deals, but the White House desperately needs to have some kind of announcement to show that it's making progress. Bessent understands this to soothe the markets and soothe the global economy a little bit, that everything is going to turn out okay. As far as court cases go, there are 3 or 4 legitimate, genuine court cases going on right now. I have long maintained, I know Rafe and I have talked about it, that the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, IEPA, which the president has used for a lot of these tariffs, it has never been used before for tariffs. Using it for fentanyl, you could defend that in court. Slapping 10% tariffs on every country in the world, that's a stretch. No court has ever challenged a president's declaration of an emergency before, but we've never had a president use IEPA for tariffs like this before. So a number of these court cases, it'll be interesting to see how far they go, but I don't want to get your hopes up too much on this, because what you're seeking is injunctive relief. You want a judge to say, while the challenge goes on, I declare that these tariffs must be turned off. In the Court of International Trade, they just ruled on one of the challenges. The others are in federal courts and said, no, we are not going to issue injunctive relief. The tariffs stay on. Your challenge can continue. It has merit. But those are some of the things that are going on right now in terms of different challenges to all of these tariffs that are being implemented.
Thanks. Anything else, Rafe, on the matter or no?
No, just I think Craig mentioned the narrow margins, and as the pressure mounts, you're likely to see additional privilege resolutions and sort of odd alliances. So you've got Senator Warren and Senator Paul who've indicated they're going to team up on one to follow up on the one that they successfully cleared through the Senate on Canadian tariffs, challenging all of the tariffs. There's a long road ahead for any of those to clear through, and getting them taken up in the House is a challenge, but I think they are another barometer of sort of the political environment that these things face, and could see more of that. I think the question I'm looking for is, if there is progress, announced that's significant on trade deals and or, a lowering of the tensions with China, does that sort of lower the political intensity to make changes? So I think we'll just have to see. The other thing I would say is there's going to be so much focus on moving this reconciliation bill through that I think it's going to sideline lots of legislation. So just, the press of getting that done could make it a challenge, but you can't ignore it. And when you have Rand Paul and Elizabeth Warren together on anything, I think it's an indicator that, there's a significant issue to be addressed.
Another piece of breaking news. So thank you for that. Before we go on, we're going to try to dig into some of the questions and things that were sort of are being mentioned in the chat. Taylor, Will, are there questions you're receiving that we have, like from your clients and people are in your kind of environment that we have not addressed? Say something that you would like to make sure people are aware of as they kind of consider all of the variables in play right now. And if not, we can just go into some of these things in our chat.
I was going to touch on something because it's come up in the chat. And I think it's easily one of the most confusing things is timelines on when. Do I have the reciprocal tariff? Do I not have the reciprocal tariff? I think that's a big question, and it's difficult because there's a lot of different buckets without a lot of nuances, just in the simplest terms possible. Basically, anything before April 5th, no reciprocal tariffs. 5th through the 9th, you're going to see a 10% across the board. After April 9th, that's when you're going to see the 125% out of China. And this is in regards to loading on the vessel at origin.
So just to clarify that people are asking, the duty is based on the time of departure on load, but it's paid at that rate on arrival.
Right. So you're going to get your final calculation upon when it's actually entered for consumption, which just means your entry is done and submitted. And that's on entry. And this is regarding the reciprocal tariffs.
Right.
This does not apply to IEEPA, your Section 301, your general tariffs, your Section 232.
Well, those have been less subject to variability in the last few weeks, correct?
Yep. Those are going to hit just about anything. The reciprocal is when you're going to fall into these different timelines.
Got it. Someone asks a question, which I'd love to hear the answer. Is there an opportunity to claw back tariffs paid since that have paid since the increase? In other words, if things are going to back up to 50 to 60% or wherever they land, but you're paying 145, 120% now, is there any recourse to claim that payment or claw it back? Craig, Brave, Taylor, William, take a shot at it.
Go ahead, Taylor.
You guys can shoot it.
Yes.
I'm going to speculate politically, and then they can, opine. I think it all depends on what agreements are reached as a process of these negotiations and how much political pressure the administration's feeling to reverse the Wall Street trends and try to restore confidence. I think, as a baseline, it probably would be the same type of thing based on ship date when the tariffs are adjusted down, but they certainly have the ability to, provide refunds if they chose to take it that far. I just can't tell.
If I could just follow up on what Rafe had to say, we do have somewhat of an example of this with the challenge to Trump 1.0's tariffs under Section 301. Very quickly, Section 301, Trade Act of 1974, U.S. Trade Representative issued this laundry list of products based on their investigation that they slapped List 1, List 2, and List 3, as everybody may know on this call. But for those that don't, 25% tariffs. And then List 4A is 7.5%. There were a large number of private sector companies that eventually collectively got together for one, I wouldn't call it class action, but basically as a class, challenged that in the Court of International Trade. The basis of the challenge was that Trump's administration claimed that lists 3 and 4A were modifications to list 1 and 2 outside the window and against the rules by which they could do so. The Court of International Trade ultimately said, you have a chance to prevail in this, and as a result, they ordered Customs and Border Patrol to put all of the tariffs into an escrow account. As soon as the money goes into the Treasury, it becomes very difficult to get it back. And so the judge ruled that those tariffs during that period of time that the Court of International Trade was considering how to rule on this one way or the other had to be held aside for purposes of returning those tariffs from list 3 and 4A back to the plaintiffs. Ultimately, the ruling was they essentially let the administration get away with it. They said that USTR hadn't followed some of the administrative procedures under the Administrative Procedures Act, slapped their wrist and said, go back and do a do-over in terms of that part of it. And that was the end of it. But the point here is we do have a precedent where at one point tariffs were put into an escrow account and not immediately put into the U.S. Treasury.
I would just add, because I'm thinking out loud, but Craig reminds me, there is litigation against the tariffs that's underway too, which we haven't talked too much about. Now, there was an adverse ruling by the International Trade Court yesterday that didn't provide an injunction to the tariffs, but there could be some relief if those tariffs, particularly the IEEPA ones, are found to be unlawful. So then the question is, would that apply to everybody or just the litigants?
Yep. Interesting. Just a note on some of the conversation going on in the chat. One of the things I can recommend that people do if we can't get to your questions right now is reach out to TQL or your freight forwarder. They should be able to help you understand some of the variables and the nuances that might be specific to your product, such as what percentage of the product. If there's a percent of stainless steel versus non-stainless steel and aluminum in a product, or the types of categories. But in the context of this, when and at how much question that keeps coming up, this one was related to bonded warehouses, but I want to put the question out there. If the duty tariffs are paid when the goods leave the bonded warehouse area, is that correct, Taylor? Will, is the tariff rate at the time of leaving the bonded area, or when the goods entered the United States?
So for a bonded warehouse, it's when it leaves the bonded warehouse to be entered for consumption into the U.S. So when
it really hasn't arrived in the U.S. as long as officially until it gets through that bonded warehouse, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And one of the cons I neglected to mention on the bonded warehouse is the time frame on how long you can store your product. So you have I say only, it is a long time. So hopefully something changes before this, but you have 5 years to store your product in a bonded warehouse.
Okay. That's a long time, but
yeah.
People. So I don't know if you've been looking at some of the chat. There's a lot of questions here that are people looking for clarification. And the one that kind of stands out is, can someone just please clarify one more time how the tariffs are being applied at the various rates on goods from China? Let's one more time for everyone's edification.
Yes, I'll hop in there, and I'm just been racking my brain for weeks trying to come up with the easiest way. So where we stand right now, your Section 301, it applies just as no change there, just as you guys have seen in the past.
That's the 20%.
25, the 25 that we've had since 2018. Then you have IEEPA/fentanyl at 20%. This is going to affect just about everything and is different than the reciprocal tariffs. Reciprocal tariffs do not apply if it's sailed before the April 5th. From April 5th to the 9th, if it's sailed, you are still going to see that 10%. After the 9th, you're going to see the 125% tariff, unless you have steel and aluminum under Section 232. In the very general terms, of course, nuances to that we're happy to help you. Your customs broker, I'm sure, is happy to help you on specifics to your goods.
So, and again, just clarifying stainless steel and aluminum, that comes up. What that would cancel out the reciprocal, correct?
Correct.
Okay, only the reciprocal.
Right.
Okay. And I know you've explained this to me 13 times in the last couple of weeks.
We were talking about trying to put together some sort of picture or timetable, but it's just very complicated.
Someone asked a question about foreign trade zones related to this right now that I thought we should just clarify. The person said, I thought the reciprocal tariffs were not exempt under foreign trade zones. I don't, but it's easy.
So, yeah, as soon as I saw that response, I looked up the Federal Register posting, and it does state that any good that is subject to the reciprocal tariff that's entered into a foreign trade zone is automatically marked into foreign privilege status, which means the tariff duty percentage is calculated at the time it's entered into the foreign trade zone. So unless there's a way for you to get it classified as a domestic status, then yes, that is correct.
So the reciprocal tariffs are not exempt in that respect under the FTZs.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So that actually mitigates the mitigation a little bit of the FTZ, correct?
The FTZ, yes. Yeah.
I want to go back to the, there was one in here that I thought would be good to get to, and bear with me. I'm just going there. Thank you all for bringing these questions. This was one of the original questions. Again, it's the calculation of tariff. First cost, wholesale cost plus shipping. What's the value that they need to be focused on right now in terms of the calculation of that tariff? What's the final? Is it landed cost? Is it what is the final cost in which they have to be aware?
In the simplest terms, amount paid for the product. This includes the goods itself, any they call assist, so molds, dyes, anything given to the foreign producer, labor, but this typically does not include international freight costs.
It does not include shipping costs then. So it's everything that went into the cost of that product before you were charged for freight.
Yes, on the price paid.
Okay. Questions here again. We get into this question of, a product is made partially of stainless steel and or aluminum, but it's the whole finished product is not. That product will be assessed. I mean, theoretically, the tariff was paid on the aluminum, on the metal, the aluminum and the stainless steel even before. I mean, is it based just on the percentage of the material in the finished product?
No, so that's where it gets even more confusing. So it has to actually be subject to the Section 232 tariff. So it has to be an HGS code that's listed in the order.
Okay.
Yep.
So there may be theoretically products that are in that order that are not 100% made from the stainless steel and or aluminum, but those products could be subjected to that 25% tariff, not whatever the reciprocal is at a given time or whatever. So
exactly. We've had some customers come up with products that don't have any steel or aluminum, but their HGS code that they were using was still subject to the 25% tariff. So that's been pretty fun figuring out. But
again, folks, there's going to be a lot of questions that relate very specifically to your businesses. We can't get to all of them today. We will be aggregating all of the chat and the questions that have been submitted, and we'll make sure we do our best to try to get those answers to you. But please feel free to reach out to our team. Taylor, will you put a website, or you put an email address in the last time that people can reach directly out to you? Can you share that with people again?
Yeah, I'll type it in here real quick.
And for those who want to reach out through me, you can reach me at pgianetti@housewares.org. And if you have a very specific question, I will do my best to channel through those who are doing that. So I don't know if Taylor, Will, or Craig or Rafe, you have any closing thoughts. Taylor, Will, did you take a look at any of these other issues in chat that you thought might be worth spending a minute or two on before we wrap up today?
Nothing off the top of my head. We are here to help you guys or your customs broker with any specifics on your goods. And then obviously we're all watching to see what develops.
Craig, Rafe, any thoughts before we close up?
Just a quick thought with regard to skimming through some of the questions in the chat box. One of them has to do with the USTR's final determination here on China ships. This allows me to put in a plug for the Government Affairs blog that is on IHA's website that anybody can access. It's monthly. That will be the topic of the blog. We have 180 days in terms of how these Chinese shipping companies, because it doesn't apply to companies who own ships made in China like Maersk. It's really going to be targeted to Costco largely. So that will be explained in that. And then one of the questions had to do is there any way to take a look at all of these tariffs on China and the effective dates? Well, I think that's a perfect lead into this new webpage that's going to be put on. We were able to source a couple of websites, Reed Smith and the Global Business Alliance, which is kind of a running tally of that. And if I'm not mistaken, Peter, I think that's going to be on this new webpage.
Yeah, it will. And thanks for mentioning those resources as well, Craig. Again, we're hoping by the end of this week, if not even sooner, that the resource page will be active on housewares.org. Attendees of today's session, those who registered for today's session, will be advised when that is ready. We will, the IHA will be putting out information on that, and Homepage News will also report on when that goes live. Also, all of the resources that we discussed earlier, like the Quick Code program, the voter voice, all of that information is reported on at homepagenews.com. Selfish little plug to Homepage News. Thanks, everyone. But it's all at your fingertips. Just search by that stuff. You can do it. But the IHA also has that at its website as well, too. This is ongoing. It's fluid. It changes every day. We came back a month after the first webinar with this one. I think we'll have an opportunity to do something like this again in the near future. I hope we've helped bring some clarity to a very, very uncertain situation. And hopefully the developments as they come out in the coming days will bring even more clarity to that. Thank you all for attending today. To my panelists, Craig Brydup, Rafe Morrissey, Taylor Cloud, and Will Mock, we thank you for your time and your insights. On behalf of the IHA and Homepage News, I'm Peter Giannetti, and we will all see you soon next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.